these people, most of these people who's being murdered right now in Mexico and all territory are nothing but students and people who are defending the land versus the transnationals and miners that want to exploit the Mexican resources. And then they're not paying anything to the people. The government is taking all the money, and so they are stealing everything, and they're just killing the people, and they won't give them enough money or a good pay for their lands. So they're just being murdered. We're here today because 43 students were disappeared, just kidnapped by authorities, and we have witnesses saying that it's the police who took them, and then they torture them, and then they shoot them. With all of the gangs, they weren't armed, so now they're saying that these people were criminals, but they're not. They were only students. This is why we're here today, and it's very important that we all know about this, and that if someone can write to the ONU or make a phone call to the United Nations, that will help a lot. We need to make pressure to let them know that we're all, on today, that we all know what they're doing. It's not fair. Please help us making a boycott. Don't buy diamonds. Don't buy Coca-Cola. Make boycotts to all of these transnationals that are hurting yourself, are hurting your health, and are hurting all of our people's lands. And not only in Mexico, but in America Latina.
Si alguien más quiere hablar, está aquí el micrófono abierto y el espacio libre. ¿Quieres hablar, Steven? Steven from the Socialist Party, Freedom Socialist Party. You can talk in English if you want, all right?
I'm here on the part of the Campaign to Free Nestora Salgado, and I'm also, there's a number of groups that are involved in this campaign, including yosoy132, Radical Women, the Freedom Socialist Party, and a number of Dorchers here in New York City, and 180 people have called for the freedom of Nestora Salgado. Her case is directly linked to why we're here today. Nestora is from the state of Guerrero, and she grew up in a town called Oinala in the Costa Chica, in the mountains of Guerrero. And it's Guerrero where 47 students were killed a month ago today, and 43 of them are still missing. And they were killed in a town called Ayotzinapa. Nestora Salgado was jailed by the governor of Guerrero and the president of Mexico a year ago on August 21st, 1913. I'll try to make the connections. Going back to Nestora, she was an immigrant, came to the United States, lived here for 9 years, and became a citizen of this country, a naturalized citizen. A few years ago, she started to make trips back to Oinala, helping the people in her town who are mostly indigenous and extremely poor. In the process of that, the narcotraficantes, the drug dealers, were taking over the town. The prosecutor from the town of Oinala was stealing the cattle of a dead man. A taxi cab driver was killed, and he walked free in the town, threatening the rest of the people with his crime. On the basis of this, the people of Oinala organized what's called a community police force. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of history. There was a Mexican Revolution in 1910. In 1917, they passed the Mexican Constitution with articles that still exist today. One of the articles of the Mexican Constitution in 1917 said that the indigenous people, the peasants of Mexico who had made the revolution, if the government did not protect them, they had the right to protect themselves. So So Nestora and the community decided to establish a community police force with the support of the Mexican Constitution and also the laws of Guerrero. When they came into contact with the prosecutor, she was arrested and accused of kidnapping. They threw her in a high security prison, had kept her for a whole year and several months. They treated her to terrible conditions. She didn't have decent water. She was not allowed to see a lawyer until a few weeks ago. And so we have been organizing since last December for her freedom. In June of this year, another man who is leading community defense forces in Michoacan, Dr. Moreles, was murdered. And we expanded our campaign for Frida Nestora Salgado and Dr. Moreles. At the same time, in Mexico today, there are over 400 people in prison for social activism. Now, that doesn't mean the hundreds and actually thousands over the past 5 years who are sitting in graves and were murdered by drug traffickers, the complicity between drug traffickers and the Mexican government officials going to the highest levels of Mexico. It has been documented that the previous Mexican president, Calderon, was all involved with the Mexican cartel in the north. So that's Nestora. Okay, going back to the students of a few years, of a month ago that disappeared and the ones that were murdered, what were they doing? Those of us who are my age would remember that in 1968, the year they had the Olympics in Mexico City, the president was all worried about the student movement. 1968 was the year that they murdered Martin Luther King. It was the year that Robert Kennedy was murdered. It was the year that France almost had a revolution. Students were in. I am here today as a representative of that generation and a socialist who's been active for the last 4 decades fighting for justice. So these were my contemporaries. The government brought out the police and they mowed down a huge number of them on October 2nd, 1968. There were like 68 things. I don't know the number, but it was tens of. It wasn't just a few. It was more than 10, and it might have been as many as 20 or 30. I'm not sure. Doesn't make any difference. So, how many? Thousands. Okay, there were. That was thousands. Not local. So anyway, the number is huge. The injustice is great. So these students in Guerrero who were actually from another town in Guerrero, who were from Ayotzinapa, every year from the Teachers College, they would go to Mexico City for the commemoration of the killing and the denunciation for the government for its murder. So they were on a bus and they'd gone to the town of Iguala, and there they were going to raise funds by asking the people for money. And in this rotten system, you can't do anything without money. No. You can't ride a bus. You can't put out a leaflet. You can hardly be heard in the political system without money. So they were collecting money in Iguala. The mayor of the town was having a rally. The Mexican government has come out and said that the mayor called on the police to stop the students, and the police are all together with the drug traffickers. And so the police shot into the bus and murdered 7 right there in cold blood and rounded up 43, and they are still missing. So the connection is that the governor of the state of Guerrero that was forced to resign by Peña Nieto the day before yesterday, he is the only person in Mexico that's keeping this woman in jail. And his party is the PRD. It's a rotten party, just like the Democrats and the Republicans, in my opinion, as a socialist. But it's a party that kept her in jail.
They're all the same, el PRI, el PRD.
There are 3 parties that run Mexico: PRI, PAN, and the PRD. And the PRI is Peña Nieto.
Yeah.
And the
That's,
PRD,
Peña Nieto
and the PRD is the one who holding Nestor.
Peña Nieto is a salinista. He's a Salinas.
He's from Salinas de Gortari. So
Salinas de Gortari is like puppet. Like
a puppet.
Yeah.
And that goes back for those people who should know, may not know. There may be, I'm sure everybody here from Mexico knows, because the conditions in Mexico have deteriorated so much because of NAFTA, which is neoliberalism. It's this privatization of everything. Mexico used to be self-sufficient on food production, and thousands of people were growing corn in the countryside, and they had lives.
We have all the resources.
Well, that has all been done away with. Now Mexico has to import food.
Yeah.
And then they bring in the drug traffickers, and I want to make a connection between the drug traffickers in Guerrero and Mexico and the drug traffickers here in the United States. The bigger consumer, exactly. And they're used as a social policy in poor and people of color communities, just like they're using the terror of drug traffickers in Mexico. And the example is right here in Harlem. Maybe some of you remember that in 1980, beginning in the mid-80s, we had a crack epidemic in this country. That was a political policy to fill the prisons with the prison industrial complex. It was also a policy to drive the people out of Harlem so that it could be rebuilt now with gentrification. That is a policy. And the same thing is happening in Guerrero, and the same thing is happening with the students. They are terrorizing the population to get them to submit. The last thing I want to say is that Nestora is an indigenous woman, and they want to send a message to the women of Mexico: do not rise up, do not support your family, do not support your husbands, do not support your children, submit. And when they say submit to the women, they destroy a people. Thank you.
Presos políticos, libertad. Presos políticos, libertad. Presos políticos, libertad. Presos políticos, libertad.
Vivos los queremos, vivos se los llevaron, vivos los queremos.